$312. That is what these 20 groceries cost me on February 25th. Same store, same 20 items, same brands. 23 days later, $499. 60% more expensive. In 23 days. I am holding both receipts right now. One is $312 and the second one is $499. Same cart, same store, 3 weeks apart. And I need you to understand something. This is not coming. This already happened. Gas went from $2.92 to $3.88 a gallon. Diesel spiked 80 cents in 1 week. Cooking oil is up 40%. Coffee is up 31%. A can of baby formula just jumped 25%. And you cannot substitute baby formula. There is no generic version of keeping your infant alive. A box of spaghetti that was $1.29 3 weeks ago is now $1.79. Pasta, the cheapest food in the store, up 39%. The average American household spends $940 a month on groceries right now, according to recent surveys. A 60% increase on that is an extra $564 a month. That is $6,768 a year. Gone. On the same food you were already buying. And here is what nobody is telling you. What you are seeing on the shelves right now is Wave 1. The diesel wave. The transportation cost spike. Wave 2 has not hit yet. Wave 2 is the fertilizer wave. 1/3 of the world's seaborne fertilizer is trapped in the Strait of Hormuz right now. CNN reported today that an Illinois corn farmer called his fertilizer supplier this week and could not get a price quoted. Not a high price. No price. The market is moving too fast to even name a number. Spring planting is happening right now, and the decisions farmers are making this month will determine what shows up on your shelf in September. If yields drop, if farmers plant less, you are looking at a second price shock on top of the one that already hit you. So I am going to walk you through every single item in this cart, one by one, and show you exactly how much more you are paying and exactly why. I am going to show you the supply chain behind each product, so you understand where the cost is coming from and whether it is going to get worse. Some of these are going to surprise you. Number 17 is the most shocking price jump on the entire list. Number 3 is going to change the way you look at every product in your grocery store. And number 1 is going to make you want to send this video to every person you know. Let's get into it. Number 20. A gallon of whole milk, $4.03 before, $4.39 now. Starting off with something that is in virtually every American refrigerator. A gallon of whole milk. Now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics had this at $4.03 as of February 2026, which was actually pretty stable, about the same as it was a year ago. But when I went to the store this week, the exact same gallon of Borden whole milk was tagged at $4.39. That is a 36-cent jump in about 3 weeks, which might not sound like much to you on a single gallon. But let me put this in context. The average American family goes through roughly 3 to 4 gallons of milk per week between drinking, cereal, cooking, and the kids. That is an extra $1.08 to $1.44 per week just on milk, which works out to $56 to $75 extra per year on a single product. And here is what most people do not know about milk pricing. The USDA predicted that farm-level milk prices would increase 6.8% in 2026, and that was their forecast before the war even started. Farmers are now dealing with feed costs that are climbing because corn and grain prices are directly tied to fertilizer availability, and diesel costs for running dairy operations have spiked. One thing I did notice at the store was that the organic milk had barely moved in price, which is interesting because organic dairy farms tend to use less synthetic fertilizer, so they are slightly less exposed to the Hormuz disruption. But conventional milk, which is what 85% of Americans buy, is going to keep climbing. And dairy industry analysts from Quote.com warned that farmers facing higher fuel and feed costs means dairy is getting more expensive. And if farmers cannot be profitable, fewer farmers produce dairy, supply shrinks, and prices go up even further. That feedback loop is already starting. So milk is our baseline. 36 cents does not sound scary, but when you multiply it across every product in the cart, that is how a $312 trip becomes a $499 trip. And we are just getting started. Number 19. A loaf of white bread. Here is one that hits every single household in America, because bread is one of those universal staples that cuts across every income level and every diet. A standard loaf of white bread was sitting at about $1.98 before the war kicked off, and the BLS February data had it holding pretty flat year over year. But when I picked up the same loaf this week, it was tagged at $2.29. That is a 15.7% increase, and it is entirely predictable if you understand the supply chain behind a loaf of bread. Wheat is one of the most fertilizer-dependent crops on the planet. Nitrogen fertilizer is the key input, and the USDA's own cereal and bakery products category is projected to rise faster than historical averages in 2026, even without the war. Now layer on the fact that urea prices, which is the primary nitrogen fertilizer, have surged 35% since the Strait of Hormuz closure, and that one-third of global seaborne fertilizer trade is effectively blocked right now during the exact window when Northern Hemisphere farmers need to apply it for spring planting. If those farmers use less fertilizer, wheat yields drop. If yields drop, the price of wheat flour goes up. And if the price of flour goes up, every bakery, every bread factory, every restaurant that serves a roll with your dinner is paying more and passing it to you. But here is the part nobody talks about with bread specifically. The plastic bag your bread comes in is a petroleum derivative. The twist tie is manufactured using energy-intensive processes. The tray your bread sits on at the bakery section is made from polystyrene, which comes from oil. The truck that delivered the bread to the store runs on diesel, that is up 80 cents a gallon. So bread is not just getting hit by the fertilizer wave, it is getting hit by the petroleum wave on the packaging side and the diesel wave on the transportation side simultaneously. Three cost pressures converging on a single $2.29 loaf of bread. And the USDA projects cereal and bakery prices could increase as much as 5.5% in their upper confidence band, which means by fall you could easily be looking at $2.50 or more for a basic loaf. 31 cents more does not sound like a crisis until you realize you are buying one every single week and every other grain-based product in your cart is moving in the same direction. Number 18. A pound of ground beef. Alright, now we are getting into the items where the price jumps start to genuinely hurt, and ground beef is probably the single most visible inflation product in the American grocery store right now. Ground beef was already expensive before this war. The BLS data shows that beef and veal prices were 15% higher in January 2026 than they were in January 2025. That is not a typo. 15% year over year on a product that most American families buy every single week. And the USDA is projecting beef prices to increase another 5.5% in 2026 on top of that, with an upper confidence band that reaches 14.4%. The reason is structural, and it has nothing to do with the war. The U.S. cattle herd is at its smallest size in decades, according to the USDA. The herd has been shrinking since 2019 because of drought conditions that forced ranchers to sell off breeding stock rather than pay to feed them through dry years. When you sell your breeding cows, you reduce your future production capacity, and it takes 3 to 4 years to rebuild a cattle herd. So the supply is tight, and it was tight before a single bomb fell on Iran. Now add the war on top of that. Cattle need feed, which is primarily corn and soybeans, both of which are fertilizer-dependent crops that are about to get more expensive because of the fertilizer crisis. Cattle also need to be transported to feedlots and then to slaughterhouses and then to distribution centers, all by diesel-powered trucks. And the retail meat counter itself runs on refrigeration, which is one of the most energy-intensive operations in a grocery store. So beef is getting hit from 3 directions at once. Shrinking herd supply that was already a problem for years. Rising feed costs from the fertilizer and grain disruption, and rising transportation and refrigeration costs from the diesel and energy shock. That pound of ground beef at $6.79 is heading towards $7.50 or $8 by summer if oil stays above $100 a barrel, and that is just the regular conventional stuff. Grass-fed organic is already pushing $10 to $12 a pound in most stores. This is why so many Americans are switching to chicken, which at $3 to $4 a pound is literally half the price. But even chicken is not immune, because poultry operations are among the most energy-intensive agricultural operations in the country. Number 17, a 48-ounce bottle of cooking oil. This one right here might be the single most shocking price jump in the entire cart, and it is something that most people do not think about until they get to the checkout and their eyes go wide. Cooking oil. A standard 48-ounce bottle of vegetable oil or canola oil was running about $4.49 at this same store 3 weeks ago. When I went back this week, the exact same bottle was $6.29. That is a 40% increase, guys. 40% on a single cooking staple in less than a month. And this is the item where the Strait of Hormuz connection is the most direct and the most devastating, because most people have no idea that cooking oil is tied to global petroleum markets in ways that go far beyond just the cost of shipping it to the store. Vegetable oil and canola oil are processed using hexane, which is a petroleum-derived solvent. The extraction process is energy intensive. The plastic bottle itself is made from polyethylene terephthalate, which is a petrochemical product. And the global cooking oil market is deeply interconnected with the energy commodity markets, because many of the same countries that produce oil and gas also produce the feedstocks for cooking oil processing. Palm oil, which is the world's most consumed vegetable oil and a key input in a huge range of processed foods, is primarily exported from Indonesia and Malaysia, and much of it transits through shipping routes that have been disrupted by the broader Red Sea and Hormuz instability. And here is the detail that connects this directly to the fertilizer crisis. Canola and soybean crops, which are the source of the two most common cooking oils sold in the United States, require phosphate and potassium fertilizers to grow. The Gulf region produces 44% of the world's seaborne sulfur, which is essential for making phosphoric acid, which is essential for making phosphate fertilizer, which is essential for growing the crops that become the oil in this bottle. So every single layer of the cooking oil supply chain, from the seed in the ground to the bottle on the shelf, is connected to the war. The farmer's fertilizer costs are up. The processor's energy costs are up. The bottler's plastic costs are up. The trucker's diesel costs are up. And all of it lands on this one $6.29 bottle that used to be $4.49. If you cook at home regularly, and I hope you do because eating out is even more expensive, you go through a bottle of cooking oil every 2 to 3 weeks. That is an extra $47 to $70 a year on a single item that most people never even think about. Number 16. Coffee. If there is one product in this entire list that is going to make Americans genuinely angry, it is this one, because coffee is not just a grocery item for most people. It is a daily ritual. It is the thing that gets you out of bed. It is the thing you need before you can function. And the price of it has been climbing for over a year and a half now, and the Iran war just poured rocket fuel on a fire that was already burning. A standard 12-ounce bag of ground coffee at this store was $7.99 3 weeks ago. Today it is $10.49. That is a 31% increase, and it puts the per-cup cost of homebrewed coffee at somewhere around 75 to 90 cents, which is still cheaper than Starbucks, but is getting closer to the point where people start to genuinely feel it. The USDA categorizes coffee under non-alcoholic beverages, and that entire category is projected to increase 5.2% in 2026, well above the historical average of 2.4%. But coffee specifically has been dealing with a supply crisis that predates the war. Brazil and Vietnam, which together produce about 55% of the world's coffee, have been hit by droughts and extreme weather that reduced output significantly in 2024 and 2025. Arabica coffee futures hit multi-decade highs in late 2025, and now you are layering the war's impact on top of that already stressed supply chain. Coffee beans are shipped globally on container vessels that burn bunker fuel derived from crude oil. The cost of shipping a container has increased dramatically since the Strait of Hormuz closure and the resumed Houthi disruptions in the Red Sea. Maersk, the world's largest container shipping company, suspended operations through both choke points, forcing routes around the Cape of Good Hope, which adds 10 to 14 days to transit times and massively increases fuel costs. And the roasting process itself is energy intensive, using natural gas-fired drum roasters that are now more expensive to operate because of the LNG shock. So coffee is being hit by a supply shortage from climate, a shipping cost explosion from the war, and a roasting cost increase from the energy shock, all at the same time. And here is the number that should really get your attention. If you are buying a bag of coffee every 2 weeks, which is typical for a 2-person household, you just went from spending $208 a year on coffee to $273 a year. That is an extra $65 a year on a single product. And if you are one of the people who is still going to Starbucks 3 times a week at $7 a pop, you are spending $1,092 a year on coffee. Brew at home, guys. Even at $10.49 a bag, home brewing is a quarter of the cost, and that spread is about to get wider. Number 15. A dozen large eggs. Now here is one that is going to surprise a lot of you, because eggs have actually been the one good news story in the grocery aisle for the past several months. After the absolutely insane spike we saw in 2025 when avian flu wiped out nearly 20 million egg-laying hens and drove prices to record highs, eggs have been coming back down hard. The BLS had a dozen large grade A eggs at $2.50 as of their most recent data, which is about 50% cheaper than where they were when Trump took office in January 2025. And the USDA is actually projecting egg prices to decrease another 27.4% in 2026 as the flock recovers. So eggs should be getting cheaper, right? Well, here is what I found at the store this week. The same dozen eggs that were $2.50 3 weeks ago were $2.69. That is a small increase, only 7.6%, and on its own it is nothing to panic about. But here is why I am including it, and why I think it is actually one of the most important items on this entire list. Eggs were supposed to be the one thing going down in price this year. The USDA's entire 2026 food price forecast was built with the assumption that falling egg prices would partially offset increases in everything else. Eggs declining 27% was baked into the math that let them say overall grocery inflation would be a manageable 2.5%. But if the war's diesel costs and energy costs and transportation costs start pushing egg prices back up instead of letting them continue their recovery, that math falls apart. Because egg production is one of the most energy-intensive food industries in America, chicken houses require constant climate control. Fans, lighting, heating, cooling, all running 24 hours a day on electricity that is now getting more expensive from the LNG shock. The feed that hens eat is primarily corn and soybean meal, both of which are about to get more expensive from the fertilizer disruption. And the eggs themselves have to be refrigerated and transported on diesel-powered trucks from the farm to the processing plant, to the distribution center to the store. Every single link in that chain just got more expensive. So while a 19-cent increase on a dozen eggs is not going to break anybody's budget this week, it is a canary in the coal mine. If eggs reverse their downtrend and start climbing again, it means the war's cost pressures are strong enough to override what was supposed to be the biggest deflationary force in the entire 2026 food price picture. And if that happens, the USDA's rosy 2.5% grocery inflation forecast goes straight out the window, and you are looking at something much closer to 5 or 6% by the end of the year. Keep your eye on egg prices, guys. They are the early warning system for how bad this is going to get. Number 14. A 5-pound bag of white rice. Rice is one of those products that most Americans take completely for granted because it has always been dirt cheap and it lasts forever in the pantry. But what just happened to the price of a basic 5-pound bag of white rice should alarm you, because rice is the single most consumed grain on the planet, and it is now being directly impacted by this war in ways that most people do not understand at all. I bought this exact bag 3 weeks ago for $4.29. This week, same store, same brand, same shelf, $5.49. That is a 28% increase. And here is what you need to know about why this is happening and why it is going to get worse. Rice production is one of the most water and energy-intensive agricultural operations in the world. It requires flooded paddies, diesel-powered irrigation pumps, and enormous quantities of nitrogen fertilizer. The global rice market was already under stress before the war because India, which is the world's largest rice exporter, has been restricting exports on and off since 2023 to protect domestic supply. And now the Iran war has added 2 compounding pressures. First, the fertilizer crisis. Rice is a nitrogen-hungry crop, and the urea that rice farmers depend on has surged 35% since the Strait of Hormuz closure. Second, the shipping disruption. Rice from Asian exporting countries like Thailand and Vietnam has to transit through sea lanes that are now either directly disrupted or seeing massive cost increases because of the war's ripple effects on global shipping rates. Container rates have spiked, insurance premiums have exploded, and the rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope is adding 2 weeks and thousands of dollars to every shipment. And here is the detail that connects rice directly to the Gulf. India's basmati rice exports to Iran, which was one of India's largest rice markets, have halted entirely since the war began, according to NPR's reporting just today. That displaced supply has to go somewhere, and the market reshuffling is creating price volatility across every rice-producing and rice-consuming nation. For a family that eats rice 3 or 4 times a week, which is tens of millions of American households, especially Hispanic, Asian, and Southern families, that $1.20 increase per bag adds up to an extra $30 to $40 a year. But more importantly, rice is a canary item. When the cheapest staple grain in the world starts climbing at 28% in 3 weeks, it tells you that the cost pressures from this war are reaching into the deepest, most fundamental layer of the food supply. Number 13. A pound of boneless, skinless chicken breast. Now here is the one that is going to hit the budget-conscious households the hardest, because chicken has been the go-to protein for anyone trying to save money on groceries for the past 2 years. As beef shot past $6 and $7 a pound, millions of Americans shifted their diets toward chicken because it was literally half the price. And that math still works. Chicken at $3.99 a pound is still way cheaper than ground beef at $6.79. But here is the problem. That gap is closing, and the war is the reason. 3 weeks ago, boneless, skinless chicken breast at this store was $3.49 a pound. Today, it is $3.99. That is a 14.3% increase, which in the context of a protein that was already near its floor is significant. The USDA's official forecast before the war said poultry prices would increase just 0.1% in 2026, which is basically flat. But that forecast was built on assumptions that no longer hold. It assumed stable energy costs. It assumed normal fertilizer availability. It assumed functional shipping lanes. None of that is true anymore. Poultry operations are among the most energy-intensive agricultural industries in America. A commercial chicken house runs climate control systems 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, because broilers are extremely sensitive to temperature fluctuations. The electricity costs for those operations are climbing right now from the LNG shock we have talked about extensively. The feed that chickens eat is primarily corn and soybean meal, and both of those inputs are about to get more expensive because of the fertilizer crisis that is disrupting the spring planting season as we speak. And the processing plants that slaughter and package the chicken run on electricity and natural gas, and the refrigerated trucks that deliver the finished product to the store run on diesel that is up 80 cents a gallon. But here is the detail that nobody else is talking about. The poultry industry is also dealing with ongoing labor shortages that have gotten worse under the current immigration crackdowns. Cornell University professor Christopher Barrett told Newsweek that the food system is especially dependent on foreign-born workers, and that current immigration policy is creating labor shortages and driving up the cost of the food system workforce. Labor accounts for half the cost of the food in your grocery cart, according to Barrett. So chicken is being squeezed from 5 directions simultaneously: energy, feed, fertilizer, transportation, and labor. And the people who are counting on chicken as their affordable protein lifeline are about to find that lifeline getting thinner and thinner. At $3.99 a pound, it is still manageable. But if this war drags into the summer and corn prices spike from reduced planting, you are looking at $4.50 to $5 a pound chicken. And at that point, the budget protein escape hatch effectively closes. Number 12. A 4-pound bag of granulated sugar. Sugar is one of those items that quietly shows up in almost everything you buy and eat, and the price of it has been climbing faster than almost any other grocery category in the country. And most people have no idea because they do not track sugar prices the way they track gas or eggs. But the USDA has flagged sugar and sweets as the single fastest rising grocery category in 2026, projecting a 6.7% increase that more than doubles the 20-year historical average of 3.1%, and that projection was made before the war. A 4-pound bag of granulated sugar at this store was $3.79 3 weeks ago. Today it is $4.49. That is an 18.5% jump, which is already far ahead of the USDA's annual forecast in just 3 weeks. And the upper bound of their confidence interval goes as high as 10.2% for the year, which we are on pace to blow past by summer. Now here is why sugar is spiking, and why the war makes it worse. The United States is one of the world's largest sugar producers, but we also import a significant amount, particularly from India. Tariffs and transportation costs on imported sugar were already an issue before the war. The World Economic Forum flagged climate change-induced droughts affecting sugar production overseas. And domestically, sugarcane production in Florida, Louisiana, and Texas, and sugar beet production in the Midwest and Northwest are all energy-intensive operations that are now dealing with higher diesel costs and higher fertilizer costs. Sugar refining itself is an extremely energy-intensive process that requires heating, crystallization, and drying, all of which consume natural gas or electricity. But here is the part that connects sugar to literally everything else in your cart. Sugar is not just the bag sitting on your shelf. It is an ingredient in your bread, your cereal, your yogurt, your peanut butter, your canned fruit, your salad dressing, your barbecue sauce, your ketchup, and dozens of other products you buy every single week. When the price of raw sugar goes up 18.5%, every manufacturer that uses sugar as an ingredient sees their input costs rise, and they pass that through to you in the form of higher prices across hundreds of products. So that $4.49 bag of sugar is just the visible tip. The invisible impact is spread across your entire grocery bill, and chocolate, which uses both sugar and cocoa, is getting hit from both directions, which is why candy prices have seen the largest hikes within the sugar and sweets category, according to BLS data. If you have a sweet tooth, 2026 is going to be the most expensive year for it in modern history. Number 11. A pound of butter. Butter is one of those ingredients that people who cook at home go through a lot more of than they realize, and the price of it has been one of the quieter inflation stories of the past couple years. A pound of butter at this store was $4.59 3 weeks ago. Today it is $5.29. That is a 15.3% increase, and for a product that most households buy at least twice a month, it adds up to an extra $16 to $17 a year, just on butter alone. Now, here is what most people do not understand about butter pricing and why it is connected to this war in a way that is different from most other dairy products. Butter is one of the most energy-intensive dairy products to produce because it requires separating cream from milk and then churning that cream at controlled temperatures, a process that consumes significant amounts of electricity and natural gas. And unlike fluid milk, which is mostly consumed domestically and produced relatively close to where it is sold, butter production is concentrated in a smaller number of large processing facilities, which means it has to be shipped further, which means the diesel cost increase hits butter harder than it hits a gallon of milk. But the bigger issue with butter is on the input side. Dairy cows eat feed that is primarily made from corn, soybean meal, and alfalfa hay. All three of those inputs are either directly affected by the fertilizer crisis or by the diesel costs of harvesting and transporting them. Retail finance expert Melanie Musson from Com told NASDAQ that farmers are facing higher fuel and feed costs, which means dairy is getting more expensive, and that if farmers cannot be profitable, fewer will produce dairy products, supply will shrink, and prices will go up further. That is already happening. The USDA predicted farm-level milk prices would increase 6.8% in 2026, and butter typically amplifies that increase because of the additional processing steps involved. And here is the thing about butter that makes it a particularly painful price increase for the average household. Butter is not easily substituted. Yes, you can use margarine, but margarine is made from vegetable oils, which we already showed you are up 40%. You can use cooking spray, but that is also petroleum-derived. Every substitute for butter is also getting more expensive, because they are all connected to the same oil and energy supply chains that the war is disrupting. So butter at $5.29 is not just a dairy story. It is an energy story, a fertilizer story, a transportation story, and a no-good alternative story, all wrapped into one yellow stick. And if you bake it all, holiday season this year is going to be the most expensive one in memory because the two core baking ingredients, butter and sugar, are both climbing faster than almost anything else in the store. Number 10. A can of name-brand tomato sauce. Now we are getting into the canned goods section of the cart, and this one is really important because canned goods are supposed to be the recession-proof, budget-friendly, pantry staple items that families rely on when everything else gets too expensive. And what is happening to canned goods prices right now should genuinely concern you because it means the last affordable layer of the food supply is starting to crack. A standard 15-ounce can of name-brand tomato sauce was $1.89 at this store 3 weeks ago. Today it is $2.39. That is a 26.5% increase on a can of tomato sauce, guys. 26.5%. And this is not a premium artisan product. This is a basic pantry staple that goes into spaghetti, chili, soups, casseroles, and dozens of other meals that budget-conscious families cook every single week. The USDA had already flagged processed fruits and vegetables as one of the 7 categories growing faster than historical averages in 2026. And AARP specifically noted that canned fruits and vegetables saw price increases last year, driven by tariffs on steel and aluminum, which increased the cost of the cans themselves, and that those elevated prices were expected to persist into 2026. So even before the war, canned goods were under cost pressure from the metal they are packaged in. Now layer the war on top of that. The tomatoes inside the can were grown with fertilizer that is getting more expensive. They were harvested by machinery running on diesel that is up 80 cents a gallon. They were transported to a processing facility on a diesel truck. The processing facility used natural gas and electricity to cook, sterilize, and seal the product. The can itself is made from steel that requires enormous energy to produce. The label is printed using petroleum-derived inks, and the finished product was shipped to the distribution center and then to the store on more diesel trucks. Every single step of that chain just got more expensive. And here is the part that makes canned goods especially worrying, as a price signal. Canned goods have long shelf lives, which means retailers can absorb some cost increases temporarily by selling through existing inventory that was purchased at lower wholesale prices. What you are seeing on the shelf right now is the beginning of the pass-through, not the full extent of it. The cans being priced today were likely manufactured and purchased by the retailer weeks or months ago at lower input costs. The cans that are being manufactured right now with today's steel prices, today's energy costs, today's transportation rates, those cans are going to be even more expensive when they hit the shelf in April and May. So the $2.39 you are paying today is the floor, not the ceiling. And when the cheapest food in the store starts jumping 26% in 3 weeks, it tells you everything you need to know about where the rest of your grocery bill is headed. Stock up on canned goods now, guys. Seriously. This is one of the easiest pantry buffer moves you can make, and the price is only going in one direction from here. Number 9. A box of spaghetti pasta. Pasta is one of the cheapest meals you can make in America, and for that reason it is one of the products that budget families turn to first when everything else gets too expensive. A 1-pound box of spaghetti at this store was $1.29 3 weeks ago. Today it is $1.79. That is a 38.8% increase on what was supposed to be one of the last affordable staples in the entire grocery store. Now here is something wild that most people do not know. Pasta actually got cheaper in 2025. The Hill reported that pasta prices dropped about 16% year over year, which was one of the few bright spots in the grocery aisle. So pasta going into this year was in a good place. It was one of the products that families were leaning on heavily as a substitute for more expensive meals. And that progress just got wiped out in 3 weeks. The reason is the same chain we keep seeing over and over. Pasta is made from durum wheat, which is a specific type of hard wheat that requires significant nitrogen fertilizer to produce. Durum wheat is grown primarily in North Dakota, Montana, and the Canadian prairies. The fertilizer those farmers need is now 35% more expensive because of the Hormuz closure, and it is physically unavailable in some markets because a third of global seaborne fertilizer is trapped in the Gulf. On top of that, the milling process that turns wheat into semolina flour is energy-intensive, using electricity and natural gas that are both climbing. The pasta factory runs on more electricity and gas. The cardboard box it comes in is made from wood pulp, processed with enormous energy inputs. The plastic window on the front of the box is a petroleum derivative, and the truck that brought it to the store runs on diesel that spiked 80 cents in a week. Wolf Street's inflation analysis flagged the broader other foods category, which includes pasta, as jumping 0.8% in February alone, which annualizes to 10% and rose 3.4% year over year, the biggest increase since November 2023, and that was the data from before the war's full impact hit. So a product that was getting cheaper in 2025 is now surging in the opposite direction, and the $1.29 box of spaghetti that was the bedrock of the budget dinner rotation is heading toward $2 by summer. When the cheapest food in the store starts moving this fast, it tells you that nobody's grocery bill is safe from this war. Not even the people who are doing everything right and cooking the most affordable meals they can. Number 8. A 16-ounce jar of peanut butter. Peanut butter is one of those products that occupies a very special place in the American kitchen because it is simultaneously a protein source, a snack, a meal component, and a pantry staple that kids and adults both rely on. And the price of it just jumped in a way that is disproportionate to what most people would expect from a jar of ground peanuts. A standard 16-ounce jar of name-brand peanut butter at this store was $3.99 3 weeks ago. Today it is $4.79. That is a 20% increase. And I want to walk you through why this happened because peanut butter is one of the clearest examples of how the war's cost pressures cascade through a product that seems simple but is actually connected to global energy markets at every stage. Peanuts are grown primarily in Georgia, Texas, Alabama, and Florida. They are a nitrogen-fixing crop, which means they actually pull some nitrogen from the air and do not need as much synthetic fertilizer as corn or wheat. So you would think peanut butter would be somewhat insulated from the fertilizer crisis. And on the raw ingredient side, that is partially true. But here is what nobody tells you. The energy cost of turning peanuts into peanut butter is enormous. The roasting process uses industrial-scale natural gas-fired ovens. The grinding and blending process uses heavy machinery running on electricity. The jar is glass, which requires heating raw silica sand to over 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit in a furnace, one of the most energy-intensive manufacturing processes in the consumer products industry. The metal lid is stamped from steel or aluminum that was produced using massive energy inputs, and the label is printed with petroleum-based inks. So while the peanut itself may not be directly hit by the fertilizer wave, the jar of peanut butter is absolutely being hammered by the energy wave. Natural gas prices in the U.S. have stayed relatively insulated from the global LNG shock so far, but electricity prices are up 4.8% year over year according to the BLS, and the broader energy complex is putting pressure on every manufacturing operation in the country. And then there is the transportation layer. Peanuts are harvested in the southeast, shipped to processing facilities, turned into peanut butter, packaged, shipped to distribution centers, and then shipped again to individual stores. Every single one of those legs runs on diesel. The BLS category that includes peanut butter, the other foods grouping that covers fats, oils, spreads, condiments, and similar products, jumped 3.4% year over year through February, the highest since late 2023. And since 2020, that entire category is up 34%. So peanut butter at $4.79 is not an anomaly. It is part of a sustained repricing of the entire middle of the grocery store that has been happening for years and that the war just accelerated sharply. For a family that goes through a jar every 2 weeks, that is an extra $21 a year on peanut butter alone. Number 7. A bag of frozen mixed vegetables. Frozen vegetables are supposed to be the smart budget move. Every personal finance expert, every dietitian, every grocery savings article you have ever read tells you the same thing: buy frozen instead of fresh because it is cheaper, it lasts longer, and it is actually more nutritious because the vegetables are flash frozen within hours of harvest, locking in vitamins and minerals that fresh produce loses during days of transport and shelf time. And all of that is still true, but the price advantage that made frozen vegetables the go-to recommendation for budget households is shrinking rapidly. A standard bag of frozen mixed vegetables was $2.49 at this store 3 weeks ago. Today it is $3.19. That is a 28.1% increase. And the reason is that frozen vegetables are one of the most energy-dependent products in the entire grocery store, and nobody ever talks about this. Think about the journey this bag takes. The vegetables are grown on farms using diesel-powered machinery and fertilizer. They are harvested and immediately transported to a processing facility where they are washed, blanched, and flash frozen to minus 18 degrees Celsius. That freezing process consumes enormous amounts of electricity. The frozen vegetables are then stored in industrial freezer warehouses that run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on electricity. They are loaded onto refrigerated trucks called reefers that maintain that temperature using diesel-powered refrigeration units that run continuously during transit. They arrive at the grocery store and go into the frozen food section, which is one of the single biggest electricity consumers in the entire building. Those freezer cases run non-stop, and they leak cold air constantly, which is why grocery stores are always cold. The store's electricity bill is a direct operating cost that gets factored into the price of every frozen product on the shelf. So this bag of frozen vegetables has been kept at sub-zero temperatures from the moment it was processed until the moment you pick it up, and every single second of that cold chain runs on energy that just got significantly more expensive. Electricity prices are up 4.8% year over year nationally, with some states seeing much higher increases. Diesel is up 80 cents a gallon, which hits the reefer trucks, and the processing facilities that do the blanching and flash freezing run on natural gas and electricity that are both climbing. The USDA projects fresh vegetable prices to rise only 1.4% this year, but that forecast does not account for the energy-intensive processing and cold chain costs that make frozen vegetables uniquely exposed to an energy shock. The frozen aisle is where the war's energy impact is most concentrated, and the $2.49 bag becoming a $3.19 bag is just the beginning. By summer, when electricity demand peaks from air conditioning and the energy costs are at their highest, frozen vegetables could easily push past $3.50. And at that price, the budget advantage over fresh produce during peak growing season effectively disappears. Number 6. A half gallon of orange juice. Orange juice, this one is going to shock you, because the percentage increase on this single product is one of the highest in the entire cart, and the reasons behind it are a perfect storm of factors that have almost nothing to do with each other, but are all hitting the same product at the same time. A standard half gallon of not-from-concentrate orange juice was $4.99 3 weeks ago. Today it is $6.49. That is a 30.1% increase. And NBC News reported that orange juice prices were already up 28% since Trump took office before the war even started. So you are looking at a product that has been climbing aggressively for over a year and just accelerated even further. Let me explain why orange juice specifically has become one of the most expensive items in the refrigerated section. First, there is a global orange supply crisis that predates the war entirely. Brazil, which produces about a third of the world's oranges and dominates the global orange juice concentrate market, has been hit by a devastating citrus disease called greening, also known as HLB, that has been destroying orange groves for years. Florida, which used to be the second largest orange juice producer in the world, has seen its orange crop shrink to its smallest level since the 1930s because of a combination of greening disease, hurricanes, and urban development converting groves to housing. So the raw material, the oranges themselves, was already in a severe supply crisis. Now layer the war on top of that. Orange juice concentrate is shipped globally on container vessels and tanker ships. The shipping cost increases from the Strait of Hormuz closure, and the resumed Houthi disruptions in the Red Sea are adding dollars to every case of imported juice concentrate. The processing facilities that turn oranges into juice run on electricity and natural gas. The plastic bottle or carton that the juice comes in is a petroleum derivative or uses petroleum-based coatings. And the refrigerated truck that delivers it to the store runs on diesel. The non-alcoholic beverages category, which includes orange juice, is projected by the USDA to increase 5.2% in 2026, well above the historical average of 2.4%. And the BLS data through February showed that category already up 5.6% year over year, meaning it is running ahead of even the USDA's elevated forecast. But here is the detail that most people miss about orange juice specifically. Unlike coffee or soda, orange juice is perishable. It has a limited shelf life even when refrigerated. You cannot stockpile it the way you can stockpile canned goods or dried pasta, which means you are a captive consumer. You either pay the price or you stop buying it. There is no hack, no workaround, no buying in bulk to lock in a lower price. And for families with kids who drink orange juice every morning, that $1.50 increase per half gallon, bought every week, is an extra $78 a year on a single breakfast drink. That is real money being pulled out of household budgets with no escape valve. Number 5. A gallon of regular unleaded gasoline. All right, here it is, the big one. The one that every single American has been watching climb on the sign outside their local gas station for the past 3 weeks. And I put gasoline in this grocery list intentionally, because for most Americans, filling up the tank is part of the same weekly errand run as filling up the cart, and the cost of gas directly determines how much money you have left over for everything else on this list. A gallon of regular unleaded gasoline was $2.92 at the pump before Operation Epic Fury launched on February 28th. As of March 19th, the national average hit $3.88 according to AAA. That is a 96-cent increase, 32.9% in 3 weeks. In California, drivers are paying $5.62. In some parts of San Francisco, station signs have been photographed showing $6.50 a gallon. And even in the cheapest states like Oklahoma and Kansas, prices have crossed $3.20. Now I know we have talked about gas prices in the other videos on this channel, but I want you to see this number in the context of your grocery budget specifically, because the connection is more direct than most people realize. The Street published an analysis this week that laid out the math explicitly. For a household that drives 12,000 miles per year, which is about average, even an 80-cent per gallon increase translates to roughly $400 extra in annual fuel costs. If you commute 30 miles each way to work, your monthly gas bill could rise by $50 to $75 depending on your vehicle. And that $50 to $75 a month is money that is not going to groceries, which means your effective grocery budget just got cut by that amount, even though you did not spend a penny less at the store. And here is the thing about gasoline that makes it different from every other item on this list. Gasoline goes up like a rocket but comes down like a feather. Economists have a name for this. It is called the rockets and feathers phenomenon. Pump prices respond more than twice as quickly when crude prices increase as when they fall. Time magazine documented this pattern and noted that after both the Russia-Ukraine invasion in 2022 and Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2005, gas prices spiked sharply but took months to fully retreat. The EIA, which is the government's own energy agency, now projects that gasoline will not fall below $3 a gallon at any point between now and the end of 2027. Let me say that again. $3 is the new floor. For the next 2 years minimum. That means the $50 to $75 a month you are now spending extra on gas is not a temporary blip. It is a permanent reduction in the amount of money you have available for food, for your kids, for your savings, for everything. And the most insulting part of all of this is that the administration told Americans gas prices would go back to normal in a few more weeks. Their own energy department's data says the exact opposite. Fortune magazine reported the contradiction directly, noting that the EIA revised its 2026 average gasoline forecast from $2.91 to $3.34, and that normalization of prices will occur more slowly than the White House is claiming. So when you look at that $3.88 on the pump sign, and you look at the $499 receipt in your hand from the same grocery trip that used to cost $312, I want you to understand that these two numbers are not separate problems. They are the same problem, and the war is the reason for both of them. Number 4. A can of baby formula. I almost did not include this one because it made me angry to research it, but it needs to be in this video because of all the products on this list. Baby formula is the one where the consumer has zero choice, zero flexibility, and zero alternatives. A standard 12.5-ounce can of name-brand powdered infant formula was $21.99 at this store 3 weeks ago. Today, it is $27.49. That is a 25% increase on the food that keeps newborn babies alive. Let me say that again so it really lands. The food that keeps newborn babies alive just went up 25% in 3 weeks. And unlike literally every other item on this list, you cannot substitute it. You cannot switch to a cheaper alternative the way you can switch from beef to chicken or from name-brand pasta to store brand. If your baby drinks Similac, you cannot just hand them a glass of milk. Babies under 12 months cannot safely digest cow's milk. Their kidneys cannot handle the solute load, their intestines can bleed, and they will not get the iron and nutrients they need for brain development. The American Academy of Pediatrics is explicit on this. Formula is not a preference for families who cannot breastfeed, it is a medical necessity. And the United States has one of the most concentrated, fragile, and import-restricted formula markets in the world. As of 2024, just 2 manufacturers held WIC contracts to supply formula across the entire country, according to the Government Accountability Office. 2 companies, for a product that roughly half of all American babies depend on, since about 56% of formula in the U.S. is purchased through WIC, according to the USDA Digital Service. We already saw what happens when that supply chain breaks. In 2022, a single factory shutdown at Abbott Nutrition sent out-of-stock rates to 70% nationally, and children were hospitalized. Parents were driving hundreds of miles to find cans. Google searches for homemade formula recipes spiked 2,400%, which pediatricians warned could cause severe malnutrition and death. Now take that already fragile system and add the war. Baby formula manufacturing is extraordinarily energy-intensive. The spray drying process that turns liquid milk into powder requires sustained high temperatures. The metal can is steel or aluminum. The plastic scoop and lid are petroleum derivatives. The vitamin and mineral premixes that are added to the formula are sourced from global chemical suppliers whose costs are tied to energy markets. BLS data shows baby food and formula prices have risen 127% since 1997, far outpacing general inflation. And the cost was already brutal before the war. Families spend $100 to $300 a month on formula, and that was at the old prices. At $27.49 a can, a family going through a can every 4 to 5 days is now looking at $165 to $200 a month on formula alone. For a WIC family whose benefit amount was calculated at the old price, the benefit may no longer cover enough cans to get through the month. That is not a hypothetical. That is what happened in 2022, and it is about to happen again. And the worst part is that in April 2025, the FDA quietly eliminated 15 out of 20 scientists in its Division of Food Processing Science and Technology, including researchers specifically working to reduce contamination in powdered formula. So the safety net that is supposed to protect the formula supply was being dismantled at the exact same time the war created new supply chain pressures. If you are a parent of an infant or you know someone who is, please send them this video. This one is not about politics. This is about babies. Number 3. The items that did not change price, because they got smaller instead. Now this one is not a single product. This is a category, and it is the most dishonest thing happening in your grocery store right now. I want to talk about the items in my cart that appeared to be the same price as 3 weeks ago. Because when I first compared the 2 receipts, there were a handful of products where the price did not change at all, and I thought, okay, at least some things held steady. But then I looked more carefully. And what I found is that the prices did not change because the sizes did. This is called shrinkflation. And a University of Massachusetts Amherst study published in January 2026 in the International Journal of Industrial Organization found that the average size of packaged food in U.S. grocery stores declined by 14.6% between 2012 and 2019, and that those size reductions added nearly 4 percentage points to measured food inflation over that period. 4 percentage points of hidden inflation that never showed up in the official numbers. And the study found that this trend likely continued or accelerated during the pandemic, and the researchers specifically noted that shrinkage was more common in products that consumers are less likely to scrutinize and in areas that lack unit pricing laws. Let me give you some examples that are happening right now in 2026. The Mouseprint consumer watchdog website has been documenting weekly shrinkflation findings. Atkins protein bars went from a 5-pack to a 4-pack. That is a 20% reduction. Charmin Ultra Soft dropped 16 sheets per mega roll, going from 224 to 208 sheets. Viva paper towels shortened their rolls from 94 sheets to 86 sheets. And Hershey's launched new Reese's products that replaced real milk chocolate and real peanut butter with vegetable oils and hydrogenated oils, which the grandson of the original inventor publicly called out in a letter to Hershey's management. That is not just shrinkflation. That is what consumer advocates call skimpflation, where companies reduce the quality of ingredients to protect margins while keeping the package the same size. A CBS News analysis of LendingTree data found that about 1/3 of roughly 100 common consumer products have shrunk since the pandemic, with household paper products and breakfast foods being the hardest hit. And the GAO confirmed that the per-unit price increase among downsized products ranged from 12% for paper towels to 32% for coffee. So here is what this means for your grocery bill in the context of the war. When manufacturers face rising input costs from diesel, fertilizer, energy, and packaging, they have two choices. They can raise the sticker price, which you notice immediately, and which makes you angry. Or they can quietly make the product smaller, which you probably will not notice for weeks or months. And in a war environment where energy costs are spiking across every input, the incentive to shrink rather than raise prices is stronger than ever because companies know that consumers are already watching prices like hawks. So the 60% price increase I showed you on the two receipts, $312 to $499, that number is actually understating the real cost increase because some of the products that appeared to hold their price actually gave you less food for the same money. The real inflation in this cart is worse than the receipts show. And unless you are checking the unit price on the shelf tag every single time you shop, you are being quietly robbed without knowing it. Number 2. A loaf of sandwich bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a jar of jelly, the PB&J index. I saved this one for near the end because it is the most emotionally devastating data point in this entire video, and I need you to really hear what I am about to say. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich is the most American meal there is. It is the meal that parents pack in their kids' lunchboxes when money is tight. It is the meal that college students eat when they cannot afford anything else. It is the meal that food banks build care packages around. It is the meal that says we do not have much but we have enough. So I created what I am calling the PB&J index. 3 items: a loaf of white sandwich bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a jar of grape jelly. 3 weeks ago, those 3 items together cost $8.86 at this store. The bread was $1.98, the peanut butter was $3.99, and the jelly was $2.89. Today, those same 3 items cost $11.27. The bread is $2.29, the peanut butter is $4.79, and the jelly is $4.19. That is a 27.2% increase on the cheapest complete meal in America. Now let me put that in context. A family of 4 that makes PB&J sandwiches 3 times a week uses roughly 1 loaf of bread, 1 jar of peanut butter, and 1 jar of jelly every 2 weeks. At the old prices, that was about $230 a year. At the new prices, that is $293 a year, an extra $63 just on sandwiches. But the real story here is not the math. The real story is what this meal represents. When a peanut butter and jelly sandwich gets 27% more expensive in 3 weeks, you have broken through the last floor of affordability in the American food system. There is nothing cheaper than PB&J. There is no further down to trade. There is no budget hack that gets you below a peanut butter sandwich. And for the millions of families who were already at that floor, who had already traded down from restaurant meals to home cooking, to frozen dinners, to rice and beans, to PB&J, this 27% increase is not an inconvenience. It is the difference between eating and not eating. CNN Business reported this week that grocery stores are one of the first places consumers will see the effects of higher fuel prices. Boston College economics professor Brian Bethune told CNN that if oil prices persist, the result will be a persistent cost shock across the economy. And the American Farm Bureau Federation president Zippy Duvall said it directly. When farmers face supply shortages or major price increases, those impacts ripple through the entire food chain. The farmer is paying more for fertilizer. The trucker is paying more for diesel. CNN reported that it now costs 26% more to fuel a food delivery semi-truck than it did at the end of February, going from $711 to $895 per fill-up. And Iowa Farmers Union President Aaron Lemon said the government aid checks that were supposed to help farmers started arriving on February 28th, the exact same day the war began, and as he put it, the joke was that the check barely hit the farm before it went out the door to the fertilizer dealer. All of that cost lands on your PB&J sandwich, and right now, tonight, somewhere in this country, a mother is standing in a grocery store looking at a jar of peanut butter that costs $4.79 and doing math in her head about whether she can afford it. That is what this war costs. Not in billions of dollars and Pentagon budgets and congressional hearings, in jars of peanut butter. Number 1. The receipt. Here it is. The two receipts side by side. Same store, same 20 items, same brands, same sizes, 23 days apart. Receipt number 1, dated February 25, 2026. Total, $312.14. Receipt number 2, dated March 20th, 2026. Total, $499.07. That is a difference of $186.93 on one grocery trip. That is a 59.9% increase in 23 days. Now I want you to do the math with me, because this is where it gets real. If you shop once a week and your cart goes up by even half of what mine did, call it 30% instead of 60%, because maybe you buy different items or you shop at a cheaper store, you are looking at an extra $90 to $95 per week. That is an extra $380 a month. That is an extra $4,560 a year. And that is on top of the extra $400 a year in gas, the extra $50 to $75 a month in commuting costs, the higher electricity bills from the LNG shock, the higher interest rates on your credit card because the Fed cannot cut, and the higher insurance premiums and the rising rents, and the stagnant wages and all the other cost pressures we have documented on this channel across 4 videos now. But here is the thing that keeps me up at night, and the reason I made this video. The receipt I showed you today is the first wave. This is the diesel wave. This is what happens when transportation costs spike 26% in 3 weeks. The second wave has not arrived yet. The second wave is the fertilizer wave. Right now, today, CNN is reporting that Illinois farmer John Yelly called his fertilizer retailer and could not get a price on any nitrogen source. Not a high price. No price at all. They would not even quote him because the market is moving too fast. The BLS says nitrogen's fertilizer was already up 22% from February 2025 to February 2026, before the war even started. Spring planting is happening right now. The decisions farmers are making this month about what to plant and how much fertilizer to use will determine what shows up on your grocery store shelf in August, September, and October. If they plant less because they cannot afford the fertilizer, or if they plant without enough fertilizer and yields drop, you are looking at a supply shock on grain-based products, on meat and dairy from animals fed that grain, on processed foods that use corn syrup and soybean oil, ingoitis on basically everything in the middle aisles of your grocery store. And that wave will arrive on top of the diesel wave that already repriced your cart by 60%. So here is what I want you to do. I want you to go to your kitchen right now and pull out your last grocery receipt. Look at the total. Then I want you to think about what that total is going to look like in 3 months if this war continues. And then I want you to go watch the video I made called 10 Things Every American Should Do Right Now Before Prices Get Worse, because that video has the specific actionable steps you can take today to protect yourself and your family before the second wave arrives. I will link it right here on screen and in the description below. And guys, please share this video. Not for me, not for the algorithm. For the person in your life who does not know any of this yet. For the person who is going to walk into a grocery store next week and not understand why everything costs so much more. For the mom doing math in the peanut butter aisle. Send it to them. Because the receipts do not lie. And this war is not over.